Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Kola Adeyemi stood by the massive window of his top-floor office, overlooking the vibrant metropolis of Lagos. The sun had just begun to sink beyond the city skyline, painting the sky in pinks and oranges that shimmered against the lagoon waters in the distance. The bustling roads below, filled with swerving danfos and okadas, epitomized the city's constant hustle. Kola found that view reassuring. It reminded him of how far he'd come from humble beginnings and how determined he was to keep rising. Kola was only 35 years old but had amassed substantial wealth through real estate, technology investments, and a new chain of upscale restaurants that dotted major cities across Nigeria. He exuded confidence, always impeccably dressed in a well-tailored suit, today in a deep navy color that highlighted his lean physique and rich brown complexion. High-profile individuals regularly sought him out for partnerships, media outlets clamored for interviews, and invitations to speak at conferences poured in. Whenever he stepped out in public, throngs of people recognized him from features in business magazines and television broadcasts. Yet, despite his outward appearance of success, Kola often felt a hollowness inside. His past carried a tangled web of regrets, many of which revolved around one woman, Tenny. She had been his rock during his struggling years, a fiercely independent and creative soul who believed in him long before others recognized his potential. They'd met as undergraduates in the bustling streets of Yaba, forging a deep connection over shared dreams of success and a desire to see Nigeria transformed through entrepreneurship. Their love story had seemed perfect then, two young hearts bound by ambition and passion. Their courtship took them everywhere: an art gallery in Lekki, beach outings at Tarkwa Bay, suya nights on street corners, and weekend trips to family in Ibadan. Despite initial struggles with finances and Kola's bold but risky ambitions, Tenny stood by him. She worked multiple jobs while studying, setting aside enough to help him register his very first startup, a small tech firm specializing in building websites for local businesses. They had believed so strongly in their shared future that they vowed never to let anything come between them. But as Kola's successes began to stack up, tensions crept in. The man Tenny had known started to disappear behind a polished facade. He was no longer the young dreamer content to share a small apartment in Surulere. He now wanted nothing less than luxury penthouses on Lagos Island. Late-night business meetings replaced their once intimate dinners, and seemingly endless out-of-town conferences meant Kola was scarcely present in her life. The more fame and money Kola gained, the more he detached from Tenny's steadfast presence, consumed by a desire to showcase his success to the world. When their marriage finally took place in a lavish ceremony at a five-star hotel in Ikeja, Tenny found herself relegated to the background. Kola's business associates and newly formed circle of rich acquaintances took center stage. The ceremony was grand, with an array of local delicacies: jollof rice, amla with yudu, pepper soups, fresh fish, and exotic cocktails. It was supposed to be their celebration, but Tenny quickly sensed that Kola was already drifting away from the simple joys they once shared. The honeymoon was brief and overshadowed by calls from investors, appointments with lawyers, and glossy magazine interviews. Inevitably, cracks widened in their new union. After 2 years of a strained marriage, they parted ways. The separation was swift and discreet, completed with minimal publicity. Kola had insisted on a large settlement to keep Tenny from making waves, but Tenny refused to take what she felt she hadn't helped earn. She took only a small amount, what she considered her share of the initial tech startup capital she'd contributed years ago, and walked away. To the outside world, Tenny vanished, going back to the quiet life she once led before meeting Kola. Kola found himself strangely relieved at first. Now there were no emotional attachments or obligations distracting him from his relentless pursuit of wealth. He never gave it much thought, until the day he met Christine, the daughter of a wealthy senator. In many ways, Christine was Tenny's opposite. She was as invested in high society as Kola, a charismatic socialite who thrived on grandeur and sophistication. Their romance was fast and exhilarating, culminating in a second engagement before the ink had even dried on Cola's divorce papers. And so, another wedding loomed on Cola's horizon. This time, it promised to be an even grander affair. Top designers flew in from Italy to tailor Christine's dresses. International chefs were hired to refine Nigerian staples into gourmet experiences, and high-profile guests from across Africa's business and political spheres were expected. Every detail exuded opulence. The media anticipated it to be the wedding of the year, if not the decade. For Kola, this ceremony was to be the definitive statement of his position at the apex of modern African success. But on a breezy Saturday evening, as he glanced yet again from his office window, Kola felt the strangest wave of nostalgia. In 1 week, he would be standing at the altar with Christine. Despite the apparent bliss on the horizon, his thoughts returned to Tenny. He wondered where she was, perhaps working in one of the city's media houses, or living quietly up north, or even running a small business. Try as he might, Kola realized he still harbored guilt. He felt he owed Tenny more than a few lines in a legal document could ever express. Little did Kola know that in just 7 days, fate would intertwine their paths again in a way neither of them could have predicted. Everything he had built, his wealth, social standing, and new relationship, would be challenged by that reunion. And it would all start at the wedding reception, under the gleaming chandeliers of a luxurious hotel in the heart of Lagos, amidst the swirl of chiffon dresses and the echoing beat of modern Afrobeats music. The following week passed like a whirlwind for Kola, filled with last-minute details for the wedding. He spent long days overseeing the menu, coordinating the decoration themes with Christine's chosen event planner, and making appearances on lifestyle television segments that touted the upcoming nuptials as the union of the year. His phone buzzed perpetually with congratulatory messages, from old university mates, from up-and-coming entrepreneurs seeking connections, and from wealthy associates who wouldn't miss the chance to attend such a high-profile event. Despite all the noise, Tenny remained on his mind like a faint melody that refused to fade. It wasn't that he still wished to be with her. Kola told himself that chapter had closed years ago. But he felt incomplete about how they'd parted. He occasionally recalled her unwavering support through his early struggles. He remembered how she'd comfort him on nights when potential investors snubbed him, how she'd watch him code for hours and bring him small bowls of spicy noodles to keep his energy up. He reminisced about how Tenny's laughter could chase away his darkest moments. As part of the wedding protocol, a special dinner was hosted in Kola and Christine's honor at a high-class restaurant on Victoria Island. Top corporate moguls and influential political figures in Lagos took turns praising Kola's business acumen, lauding him as one of Nigeria's brightest minds. Christine dazzled in a breathtaking lace gown, sporting expensive diamond jewelry that matched the sparkle in her eyes. Yet, amidst all these shining faces, Kola felt a weird sense of longing. He realized that while these people adored his success, many knew little of the real battles he had fought, battles Tenny had once fought alongside him. Late that evening, Christine left with her entourage for further wedding rehearsals and a private spa treatment. Kola found himself driving home alone. He deliberately chose to pass through Surulere, remembering the old apartment he once shared with Tenny. It was a 2-room flat in a modest compound, the kind where neighbors occasionally quarreled over shared utilities but also gathered to celebrate birthdays and football victories. That small corner of Surulere had been the cradle of his dreams, the place where he first glimpsed what real partnership looked like, with Tenny by his side. He parked his sleek black SUV a short distance from the compound gate to avoid drawing attention. Staring into the dimly lit courtyard, he saw a few changes: fresh paint on the building walls, an extra security wire overhead, and new potted plants by the entrance. But much remained the same. Memories flooded his mind. Tenny smiling as she carried groceries in her arms, Tenny falling asleep on the living room couch after a long day. He questioned whether he should contact her before the wedding, to apologize for the abruptness of their separation, perhaps to find closure. But that would mean reopening a wound he'd tried so hard to seal. Eventually, he drove off into the night, the hum of the car engine breaking the silence on empty streets. When he arrived at his high-rise condominium on Lagos Island, He stepped into a world of polished marble floors, glass chandeliers, and silent corridors. This was the life he'd worked so hard to build. A life of comfort and luxury he used to dream about when he slept on a thin mattress in Suralire. Yet, he felt no sense of triumph in that moment. He felt a pang of uncertainty. The day before the wedding arrived, and the city buzzed with talk of the grand event. Billboards around Lagos were plastered with Kola's corporate empire advertisements. Social media bristled with speculation on who would wear what. The top radio stations ran contests for invites to the afterparty. Friends flew in from South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, and even as far as the United States and the United Kingdom. Kola woke up early, stepping onto his balcony that offered a panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean. He inhaled the salty breeze, trying to calm the rising tension in his stomach. The glimmer of morning light across the water felt like an omen. He wasn't entirely sure if it was good or bad. Part of him wondered if he was truly ready for this second marriage. Another part chided him for allowing old regrets to cloud what should be the happiest week of his life. Seeking clarity, he decided to visit his mother in Ikeja. She was a calm, wise woman in her late 50s, her hair neatly wrapped in a simple gele, her face marked by the gentle lines of a life that had seen both triumph and hardship. Over a breakfast of hot akara and pap, he listened as she spoke gently yet firmly. "Son, every new beginning needs a clean heart. If there's anything weighing you down, you must address it before stepping forward." While she never mentioned Tenny by name, her words were pointed. Kola knew his mother was far too perceptive to miss the shadow that had followed him. By evening, the wedding rehearsal was in full swing at the prestigious Grand Pearl Hotel. Christine and her bridesmaids were perfecting their aisle processions, while the groomsmen practiced their choreographed entrance. A flamboyant wedding planner barked orders about floral arrangements and lighting. The air was perfumed with roses, lilies, and the lingering aroma of gourmet dishes being prepped by the internationally renowned chef Kola had hired. However, in the flurry of lights, loud instructions, and practiced laughter, Kola found his mind drifting once more to Tenny. As he left the rehearsal, Christine gave him a lingering kiss on the cheek. "Tomorrow, we start our forever," she whispered. Kola nodded, forcing a reassuring smile. He genuinely cared for Christine. She was clever, driven, and definitely understood the social spheres he now inhabited. But was it enough? Should that quiet sense of something undone remain ignored? Unbeknownst to Kola, the answers he sought would arrive sooner than he imagined. Tenny wasn't miles away. She wasn't living in a remote city. She was very much present, working shifts in places he frequented, unrecognized, overshadowed by life's circumstances. In less than 24 hours, her face would appear before his eyes, not as a cherished memory but as a startling reality. And that moment, as shocking as it would be, would test every layer of Kola's conscience and the future he was about to step into. The day of the wedding dawned bright and balmy, the Lagos sun peering over the skyline as if eager to witness the most talked-about union in town. Grand Pearl Hotel glistened in the golden light, its imposing glass facade welcoming a parade of exotic cars and elegantly dressed guests. The hotel staff, dressed in crisp uniforms with discreet gold embroidery, scurried about to ensure every arrangement was flawless. In the sprawling banquet hall, enormous chandeliers cascaded from the ceiling, bathing the area in a warm, opulent glow. Christine looked every bit the modern African bride. Her gown, a fusion of contemporary European design and traditional Nigerian lace, trailed behind her in regal fashion. She wore a dazzling set of rose gold jewelry set with glimmering diamonds, gifts from her senator father, who spared no expense to showcase his daughter's day of splendor. And by her side stood Kola, his bespoke tuxedo expertly tailored, his polished shoes reflecting the shimmering decor around them. The ceremony began in a swirl of color and music. A live band played a fusion of Afrobeats and jazz, entertaining guests who arrived in an array of vibrant gele, ankara, and luxurious lace fabrics. Traditional Yoruba dancers enthralled the crowd with energetic steps, bridging the gap between old and new. Everything sparkled with the promise of a majestic celebration. After the church service, held in a regal chapel just off the hotel grounds, everyone proceeded to the ballroom for the reception. A buffet of modern African cuisine awaited: gourmet jollof rice with coconut-infused sauce, grilled tilapia adorned with delicate herbs, goat pepper soup refined to perfection, and small chops that showcased the creativity of fusion cuisine. The atmosphere was electric with the sound of laughter, champagne corks popping, and cameras clicking incessantly. Kola stood at the head of the hall, greeting relatives, dignitaries, and old classmates who came bearing gifts and well wishes. His mother gave him an encouraging nod, while Christine, radiant and gleeful, entertained her coterie of bridesmaids and female relatives. In another corner, Christine's father mingled with high-level government officials, each conversation a subtle interplay of power and wealth. To any onlooker, it was the epitome of a fairy tale wedding set in modern African luxury. Then, as dessert was about to be served, Kola noticed something peculiar among the waiting staff clearing tables at the far side of the hall. A woman in a simple uniform, her face partially obscured by a black headscarf, pushed a trolley filled with plates. Initially, it was her posture that drew his attention. Despite the unassuming uniform, there was an unmistakable grace in her movements that stirred a sense of déjà vu within him. Distracted by a friend calling for a quick photograph, Kola tore his gaze away, but the nagging sense of familiarity lingered. Moments later, he spotted her again, this time bending slightly to pick up a stray napkin. Her face tilted just enough for him to see her profile. Kola felt his breath catch in his throat. He blinked to confirm his eyes were not deceiving him. It was Tenny. There, in the corner of his lavish reception, stood the woman he had once pledged his life to. And what made his heart pound even more was the subtle yet undeniable swell of her belly beneath her uniform. Tenny was pregnant. Shock coursed through Kola's veins, causing him to pause in mid-conversation. The noise of the crowd seemed to fade, replaced by the pounding of his heartbeat. He wanted to approach her instantly, to demand why she was here, to confirm his suspicion that she was indeed with child. But his feet felt cemented to the floor. A swirl of emotions, guilt, compassion, regret, and confusion, rendered him momentarily motionless. Tenny, on the other hand, had her head lowered, focusing intently on her job. She had no idea that her ex-husband, now a multimillionaire groom, was staring at her from across the hall. In truth, she had accepted this job only a few weeks prior, desperate to make enough money to afford prenatal care and living expenses. She had done all she could to avoid direct involvement in any high-society events, but in Lagos, fate had a way of throwing people together, especially those with unresolved histories. Eventually, Tenny lifted her gaze and noticed Kola looking directly at her. Her eyes widened, momentarily paralyzed by the shock. Her hands began to shake, causing a glass dish to slip from her grasp and shatter on the polished marble floor. A hush fell over the surrounding guests, some turning curiously to see the source of the commotion. Christine, from a distance, also glanced over in concern, but the significance of the moment was lost on her. Kola shook off his hesitation. With urgent steps, he moved toward Tenny, meeting her gaze. Pain, surprise, and a flood of unspoken words passed between them. In that singular moment, all the carefully orchestrated glamour of the wedding receded into the background. Everything else seemed trivial: his newly inked marriage, the glistening decor, the chorus of celebratory voices. "Tenny," he whispered, crouching down to help pick up the shards of glass scattered around her feet. He noticed her trembling hands and the tears that pooled in her eyes. Without thinking, he reached for her arm, but Tenny instinctively pulled away. Standing up, she looked around anxiously, aware that eyes were upon them. The head of the waitstaff, a stern woman in her 50s, rushed over to manage the situation. "I'm so sorry, sir. Are you hurt?" she asked, looking between Kola and Tenny, clearly concerned for her job. Guests murmured with curiosity, but a swift intervention by event organizers got them to refocus on the stage, where an MC had begun a lively toast to distract everyone. Tenny backed away slowly, murmuring an apology under her breath. Without waiting for a response, she turned and hurried toward the service corridor. Kola stood there, the shattered glass at his feet symbolizing the abrupt shock that had just fractured his carefully choreographed world. Dazed, he glanced toward Christine, who was smiling politely at a distant camera, utterly unaware of the emotional tempest churning inside him. On instinct, Kola decided he must speak to Tenny. This wasn't merely about seeing an ex-wife, she was pregnant, and he suspected it might be his child. There was too much left unsaid, too many buried emotions that had suddenly burst through the surface of this glamorous day. Ignoring the curious stares, he moved toward the corridor, following Tenny's path, oblivious to his new wife scanning the crowd, suddenly aware that her groom had vanished from her side. What was meant to be a moment of pure joy and celebration had now been overshadowed by a reunion of the past. And as Kola disappeared through the door, heart pounding, he had no idea how Christine, or anyone else, might react to the scandal about to unfold. Kola hurried through the narrow corridor behind the ballroom, the faint smell of disinfectant blending with the aromas of food wafting from the kitchen. Stark fluorescent lights overhead cast shadows along the walls. He knew he was abandoning his own wedding festivities, but he couldn't ignore the storm of questions raging inside him. Somewhere down this hall, Tenny was likely hiding in a staff room or empty corner, possibly shaken to her core. As he navigated past catering staff pushing trolleys and busy waiters balancing trays of dishes, Kola felt out of place in his ornate tuxedo. The corridor was a stark contrast to the grand ballroom. No plush carpets or decorative flowers, just stark white walls and the sound of clanging pots. The staff gave him startled looks, half bowing or stepping aside because they recognized him as the groom. If any of them found his presence here strange, they did well to conceal it. He turned a corner and saw Tenny standing by a small break room entrance, her eyes focused on the tiled floor. The tension in her posture was evident. She wrung her hands anxiously, her headscarf slightly askew from the earlier shock. Kola paused, bracing himself for whatever conversation would follow. This was more than a run-of-the-mill encounter. History lay thick between them, as did an undeniable sense of heartbreak. "Tenny," he called softly. She lifted her eyes, which glistened with tears. For a moment, they stared at each other, two souls once deeply intertwined, now separated by years of estrangement. Tenny looked older but still achingly beautiful, with a grace that underscored her fragile state. Kola's gaze briefly dropped to her belly, confirming once again that she was pregnant, her uniform ill-fitting around the growing bump. "How did you end up here?" he asked, his voice almost trembling. I had no idea. Are you?" He hesitated, uncertain how to phrase the question that throbbed in his mind. "Are you all right?" Tenny inhaled shakily. "I'm working," she replied curtly, wrapping her arms protectively around herself. "I don't have the luxury of turning down jobs, especially not right now." Kola absorbed the weight of her words. It stung to realize she was struggling enough to accept waitstaff work at one of the city's biggest weddings. His wedding. The sheer coincidence made him suspect it wasn't a coincidence at all, yet it was evidently unplanned from her reaction. "I didn't mean to startle you," Kola said, his voice subdued. "If I had known..." "Known what?" Tenny cut in, a flash of anger crossing her features. "Would you have canceled your big day just because I'm on the waitstaff roster? Don't flatter yourself, Kola. I'm only here for a wage. My being here is not about you." Her words were raw, slicing through any pretense of casual conversation. Kola felt a twinge of defensiveness mixed with guilt. He quickly glanced around to see if any staff were listening. The corridor was busy, but everyone was too absorbed in their tasks to eavesdrop. Still, he lowered his voice. "You're pregnant, Tenny. Does that mean..." He couldn't bring himself to say the words. "Is it my child?" The question dangled in the tense air between them. Tenny's eyes flashed with a complexity of emotions, hurt, sadness, and perhaps a touch of defiance. "My personal life is my own concern," she replied, gripping the edge of a chair beside her. "I don't owe you an explanation. Not after the way things ended." Kola felt an acute pang in his chest. He had anticipated anger, but the reality of facing Tenny's heartbreak was more difficult than he'd imagined. "Listen, Tenny," he began, stepping closer. "I know you resent me, maybe you should, but at least let me help. Whatever you need, just say the word. Money, a safer place to stay, the best hospital, name it. If you are carrying my baby, I want to do something. I want to fix whatever can be fixed." Tenny let out a bitter laugh that echoed in the sterile corridor. After all this time, you swoop in on your fancy horse and want to fix my life? You think money solves everything? It doesn't. Not my heartbreak, nor the humiliation I went through, nor the sleepless nights wondering what I did wrong to make you leave me behind. She paused, tears trembling on her lashes. And as for the child, let's just say you have no claim until the moment I decide you do. Kola swallowed hard. Her voice cut deeper than any business betrayal or financial failure he had ever experienced. Still, behind the anger, he sensed her vulnerability. He reached out, lightly touching her arm. This time, she didn't jerk away, but her body remained tense. I regret so many things, Tenny, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. More than you know. Not a day passes that I don't wonder if I could have done right by you. I should have done right by you. It was never my intention to leave you broken. I was just lost in ambition, chasing success, forgetting who mattered along the way. Tenny closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself with a deep breath. Well, congratulations. You're standing on top of your world now. But I had to find a way to survive after you left. I had no one to lean on, no trust fund, no senator father to bail me out. Just my own 2 hands. And now, this baby is the only family I have. Before Kola could respond, the stern head of waitstaff appeared, startled to find Tenny still in the corridor. Tenny, what are you doing here? She hissed, eyeing Kola with trepidation. We're short-staffed out there, and the guests. She trailed off when she noticed Tenny's tears and Kola's stricken look, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. Tenny sniffed, wiping her cheeks. I'm sorry. I'll get back to work. She turned to walk away, but paused briefly at Kola's side. Their gazes locked, thousands of words unspoken in that single glance. Then she pushed past the waitstaff manager and disappeared into the busy kitchen. Kola remained in the corridor, reeling from the encounter. He felt torn between his newly minted life with Christine and the glaring reality that Tenny might be carrying his child. He knew Christine would come looking for him soon. The entire reception was waiting for the couple's entrance, the toasts, the first dance. Yet how could he stand on that stage, smiling and celebrating, when his past hovered at the periphery, unresolved, pregnant, and clearly distressed? A single question thundered in his mind. Could he abandon Tenny again, this time with a baby on the way? Kola returned to the ballroom, his head swimming with the weight of Tenny's re-emergence. The wedding reception was still in full swing. Guests were dancing, the DJ had ramped up the music, and a comedic MC was entertaining the crowd with anecdotes about love and modern relationships. At the far end of the hall, a tall, multi-tiered wedding cake stood on a decorated platform, awaiting the couple's ceremonial cutting. Spotting Christine, Kola braced himself for her reaction. She was engaged in animated conversation with some of Lagos's high society elite, including her father and a prominent business tycoon. The moment she saw him, her perfect smile faltered. She excused herself and crossed the floor toward him, her gown flowing behind like a trail of stardust. "Where did you go?" she asked in a hushed, urgent tone. "I've been looking for you. It's our wedding day, there are traditions to follow, pictures to be taken, family to greet." Although her words were reproachful, Kola could sense the underlying concern in her eyes. "I needed to step out for a moment," he replied, forcing as much composure as he could muster. "Something came up." Christine narrowed her gaze slightly. "Something more important than your own wedding reception? Kola, are you feeling well?" "I'm fine," he answered quickly, though he was anything but. Glancing around, he noticed how many eyes were discreetly following their exchange. Guests in glittering attire, servers passing champagne flutes, even the photographers lurking for a candid shot. Everyone was aware the groom had been missing in action. Gossip had likely started to swirl. He reached for Christine's hand, trying to soothe her. "Let's not make a scene. We can talk about it later." Christine exhaled sharply. She had become adept at managing high-stakes social situations, so she nodded in agreement. "We'll talk," she whispered, her expression firm. Then she turned, flipping back into a radiant smile for the cameras, and guided him to the cutting of the cake. For the next hour, Kola did what was expected of him. he smiled for photographs, he fed Christine a forkful of cake, and he danced in the center of a cheering crowd. Confetti rained down, merging with the glow of chandeliers. If one didn't look too closely, it all seemed perfect. The handsome groom in black and white, the beaming bride in lavish lace, the swirl of guests capturing every joyous moment on their phones. Yet beneath the veneer of celebration, tension simmered. Cola's eyes roamed the periphery of the ballroom, half expecting Tenny to appear. He couldn't help but wonder if other staff recognized him and realized the situation. Maybe they'd gossip among themselves, or someone might leak a scandalous story to the press. Billionaire groom reunites with pregnant ex-wife at his own wedding. The headlines alone would electrify Lagos's rumor mills, overshadowing the entire event. Eventually, Christine noticed Cola's frequent glances. During a momentary lull, she pulled him aside to a quiet corner of the hall. "Beneath a floral arch, I can see you're distracted," she said in a level voice, one that carried the authority she'd been raised to wield. "We're married now, Cola. We can't afford secrets or half-truths. What is going on?" His heart pounded. He could either deflect the question and lie, or he could come clean. The latter option risked everything blowing up right here, but the former felt impossible. He looked at Christine, taking in her regal posture, the carefully crafted makeup, the expensive jewelry. She was the epitome of the affluent world he had embraced. Did she have the capacity to understand or handle the news about Tenny? Yet Cola realized he owed Christine honesty. If there was any hope for their future, he had to start by telling the truth. "I saw someone unexpected," he began, voice low. "Tenny is here." Christine's face remained blank, clearly not immediately recognizing the name. "Tenny? My ex-wife," he clarified softly. "She's working the event as part of the waitstaff." "And she's pregnant?" Christine's jaw tightened. Her eyes hardened, though she tried to maintain composure. "Pregnant," she repeated, the word hanging between them like a grenade about to explode. "And you think?" "I don't know," Cola said quickly, frustration lacing his voice. "We haven't talked in years. Our divorce was finalized before you and I started dating. But the timeline. Christine, there's a possibility that baby is mine. I can't just ignore it." For a moment, Christine said nothing. She glanced out at the sea of guests. Her father was across the hall, entertaining some foreign dignitary. Photographers waited patiently for the newlyweds to return to the spotlight. The air felt thick with expectations and unspoken judgments. Finally, Christine fixed her gaze on Cola. "This is our wedding day. The biggest day of our lives, overshadowed by someone you left behind. How do you think that makes me feel?" Cola grimaced. "I never wanted it to happen this way. I only found out a few minutes ago, Christine. Believe me, I'm as shocked as you are. But Tenny is the mother of my potential child. I have to talk to her, see what she needs." Christine looked away, her lips taut. "It always comes back to her, doesn't it?" she asked, a trace of bitterness creeping in. "Even on our wedding day. I won't pretend to be happy about this, Cola. But if you must see her, I can't stop you. Just remember what's at stake, our reputation, this partnership, everything we built." She spun on her heel and walked away, rejoining a cluster of guests who were beckoning her for photographs. Cola stood by the floral arch, breathing heavily. He felt like he was caught in a rip current, one that threatened to pull him away from the safe shore of his new marriage into the tumult of his past. As he scanned the crowd, he noticed Tenny slipping discreetly among the tables, clearing plates, keeping her head down. He needed a moment to think, to figure out his next steps. The demands of his wedding day pressed down on him like a suffocating wave. Family members wanted pictures, the caterers needed directions, the band was waiting for the couple's first official dance, and Christine was valiantly trying to keep the festivities lively. Every passing minute made the situation more complicated. Cola knew that if he didn't handle this carefully, he might end up losing everything: his new wife, his social standing, and the chance to reconcile with Tenny in any meaningful way. Yet, in the midst of that swirl of wealth and social obligations, one truth stood out clearly: Tenny might be carrying his child. That single realization overshadowed the grandeur of the day, anchoring him to a moral obligation he could not brush aside. With resolve, he decided that, after the reception, he would find Tenny again and arrange a proper discussion. For now, he had to maintain composure in front of the hundreds of guests who had come to celebrate. But Kola suspected the echoes of what had happened today would reverberate far beyond this ballroom, changing the course of his life in ways he could barely predict. Hours later, after countless pictures, traditional Yoruba greetings, toasts from dignitaries, and enough dancing to exhaust even the most energetic guests, the reception began to wind down. Guests gradually filtered out, groups at a time. Some remained, hopeful of a final moment with the new couple, while others quietly exited to avoid the city's late-night traffic. Christine excused herself to freshen up and change into a more comfortable outfit for the after-party. Kola seized the opportunity to slip away from the lingering crowd. He made his way back through the same service corridor as before, scanning for any sign of Tenny. The corridor was quieter now, the hustle reduced to a few staff members completing final cleanup tasks. He spotted Tenny in a side room reserved for staff breaks. She sat on a plastic chair, her uniform slightly soiled from the day's labor, her face drawn with fatigue. Kola approached cautiously, knocking lightly on the door frame. Tenny lifted her gaze, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. They stared at each other for a moment in a silence that spoke volumes, of regrets, of lingering affection, of an unspoken future that neither knew how to approach. "We need to talk," Kola said softly, stepping into the room. Tenny nodded, her voice low. "I know." They found a corner away from the door, where a small table and 2 chairs offered a semblance of privacy. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Kola sat down first, resting his hands on the table. He struggled to find the right words, torn between an apology, a promise, and 1,000 regrets. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused you," he began, his voice quivering just enough to reveal his vulnerability. "No matter what you think of me, I don't want to leave you stranded or unsupported. Tell me what you need, Tenny. Please." Tenny exhaled slowly. She clasped her hands around her belly as if to draw courage. "I need a lot of things. Security, money for prenatal care, a stable environment. But I also need clarity. I need to know why you stopped loving me, why you threw me away like I was nothing." "I never stopped loving you," Kola replied, his throat tight. "I got lost. Fame and money can warp a person's sense of reality. I thought I was doing the right thing by focusing on business and ensuring we'd never be poor again. But in the process, I neglected the one person who genuinely mattered. I'm not excusing myself, I just want you to know it wasn't about you. It was about my own insecurities." Tenny studied him, her eyes shining with restrained emotion. "It was always about you, Kola. Your ambitions, your deals, your parties, your new friends. I tried to keep up, but I wasn't that person. I believed we could meet halfway, but you kept moving the finish line. Finally, I was too tired to chase you anymore." Kola closed his eyes, nodding slowly. "I was wrong. So wrong." He opened his eyes again, locking onto Tenny's stare. "But I can't change the past. All I can do is choose what to do now. If that child is mine, I want to be involved. Not just financially but as a father. If you'll let me." Tenny swallowed hard, her emotions swirling beneath a composed exterior. "Yes, it's a boy. And yes, he's yours. The timing worked out so that I realized I was pregnant after we signed the divorce papers. By then, you were gone, and I had no idea how to reach you without looking like I was after your money. I didn't even want to see you, to be honest. It all hurt too much." A whirlwind of relief, excitement, and fear washed over Kola. He had a son on the way. This was real. His mind spun with images of fatherhood, of witnessing a child's first smile, first steps, first words. Yet overshadowing these hopeful visions was the realization that his entire future with Christine was now in jeopardy. "We can figure this out," he said urgently, leaning forward. "You don't have to struggle alone. Let me provide for you." "Let me? What about your new wife?" Tenny asked, her voice trembling. "What about Christine? I saw her face everywhere in the news. Your big society wedding, your future partnerships. You think she'll welcome a pregnant ex-wife into the picture?" Kola hesitated, the question echoing in his mind. "I told her. She knows you're here. She knows you're pregnant. She doesn't know all the details yet, but I can't hide the truth. If she can't accept this, then we have to confront that now, because I won't turn my back on my child." Tenny looked away, her eyes brimful with tears. Slowly, she nodded, as if acknowledging a subtle shift in the man she once loved. "Your mother was right," she whispered. "She always said you had a good heart, even if it was buried under ambition." A faint smile tugged at Cola's lips, though heartbreak lingered in his eyes. He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a small business card. "Here," he said, placing it on the table. "It has my personal line and the number of my attorney. I want you to call me anytime. I'll arrange for you to stay somewhere safe, comfortable. We can discuss the rest when you're settled. I'll do it properly, Tenny. I promise." For a moment, Tenny stared at the card. Then she carefully picked it up and slipped it into her pocket. "I'll think about it," she managed. "I'm not ready to fully trust you again. But for our son's sake, I'll consider it." Cola bowed his head in acceptance. He knew this was the most he could hope for right now. Outside, the noise in the corridor had faded into near silence. Most guests had departed. The wedding that began in extravagance had ended in a quiet corner of truths and revelations. Standing up, he gently touched Tenny's arm. "Thank you," he said softly, meeting her gaze one last time. She nodded, her lips parting to speak, but no words came out. The bond they once shared lingered like a faint glow, overshadowed by time but not extinguished. As Cola stepped back into the corridor, he felt an odd mix of resolve and anxiety. He still had to face Christine, to explain in greater detail. The repercussions for his brand, his social standing, and even his marriage were uncertain. Yet for the first time in years, he felt he was doing the right thing. He walked away from that staff room with a renewed sense of responsibility, a recognition that life was more than transactions and status. It was about relationships, family, and the willingness to confront one's mistakes without cowardice. Under the fluorescent lights, Kola Adeyemi, the celebrated millionaire groom, prepared to exit the hotel as a man in transition. He would step into a future carrying both the hope of fatherhood and the weight of his past decisions. And whether his marriage to Christine could endure this monumental twist remained a question without an easy answer. But in that moment, as the staff cleared away the last vestiges of a grand reception, Kola walked forward, determined to stand by Tenny and the child they had unwittingly created, a promise renewed in the heart of modern Lagos. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.